The envelope satisfied on the table like a goodbye that hadn't been spoken yet. Yellowed and soft at the edges, creased from being held too many times, it rested beside a $2 bill folded into a small triangle. The same fold. The same table. The same booth by the window where she'd sat every single morning for 6 years. Her fingers, thin and trembling, pressed the envelope flat against the scratched formica. Then she stood, slowly, without a word, without looking back. The waitress watched her walk through the door past the parking lot into the pale morning light. She didn't wave. She didn't turn around. She was gone. And on the table next to the last $2 bill she would ever leave, the envelope waited. Thick. Sealed. Heavy with something the waitress couldn't yet understand. But we need to go back. Back to before the envelope, before the last visit. Back to a Tuesday morning that looked exactly like every other Tuesday morning for the past 6 years. The bell above the door at Raylan's Diner rang at 6:47 a.m. It always rang at 6:47. Denanisha Holloway didn't even look up anymore. She knew the sound the way you know your own heartbeat. Steady, familiar, reliable in a world that wasn't. She was already pouring the coffee. Black, no sugar, into the same chipped white mug with the faded Tennessee Volunteers logo on the side. The fluorescent light above the counter buzzed and flickered like it had been doing for 3 years. Nobody ever fixed it. The air smelled like burned coffee and bacon grease, and the sharp lemon of the floor cleaner Denanisha had mopped with an hour ago. Her apron still had yesterday's stain on it. A smear of gravy near the left pocket that she'd meant to wash out but didn't, because by the time she got home, put Zuri to bed, packed tomorrow's lunch, and sat down, it was already 11, and the washing machine needed quarters she didn't have. Opel May Dawson walked to booth number 4. She always walked to booth number 4. The one by the window where the morning sun hit the formica table and turned it almost gold for about 20 minutes before shifting to the next booth over. Opel liked those 20 minutes. She never said so. But Denanisha noticed she always angled her coffee cup to catch the light. 78 years old, small, slower than she used to be. Her left hand trembled when she lifted things, but her voice never shook. Her voice was steady like a hymn you've sung so many times it sings itself. Morning, Miss Opel. Morning, baby. That was it. That was the whole conversation most days. 2 words each. Sometimes 3 if the weather was doing something worth mentioning. But those 2 words carried 6 years of showing up. 6 years of the same booth, the same mug, the same order. 1 egg scrambled soft. 1 slice of white toast, no butter. Coffee black. Denanisha brought it out without writing it down. She hadn't written down Opel's order since the 2nd week. She set the plate down gently because Opel's hands were slow in the morning and the plate was hot. She refilled the coffee without being asked because the first cup was always gone by the time the food arrived. Opel ate slowly. She always ate slowly. Like the meal was the only appointment on her calendar. Like there was nowhere else to be and no one waiting. She looked out the window while she chewed, watched the cars pass on Lamar Avenue, watched the man at the bus stop across the street fold his newspaper into a square. When she finished, she placed her napkin on the plate, folded once, then twice. Neat. Precise. The way a woman folds things when she spent a lifetime teaching children to be careful with what they have. And then, the $2. She slid it under the edge of the toast plate. A single bill folded into a small triangle. The crease was sharp, deliberate, like she'd folded it at home before coming. Like the folding was part of the ritual, not just the leaving. $2. Every single day. Not a penny more, not a penny less. Rain or heat wave. Christmas morning or a regular Wednesday in March. $2 folded into a triangle tucked under the plate. Denanisha never asked why. Not why the triangle. Not why always 2. Not why Opel came alone every day to a diner where the coffee was barely decent and the toast was nothing special. Some things you don't ask about. You just let them be. Denanisha Holloway was not born into easy. She grew up on a block in South Memphis where the streetlights worked on odd-numbered houses and gave up on the rest. Her mother, Yvette, worked 2 shifts at the industrial laundry plant on Mallory Avenue, came home smelling like bleach and steam, hands cracked and raw, feet swollen past the shape of shoes. Her father left when Denanisha was 7. No argument, no fight. Just a Thursday morning when his side of the closet was empty and his truck was gone from the driveway. Yvette didn't cry. She didn't explain. She just picked up a third shift on Saturdays and told Denanisha to heat up the leftovers for dinner. Denanisha learned early that love was not about what people said. It was about who showed up. And her mother showed up, broken and exhausted and barely holding on, but she showed up every single day. Then junior year happened. Yvette had a minor stroke on the assembly line, collapsed right into a pile of hotel sheets. The hospital kept her for 4 days. The laundry plant kept her job for 2 weeks. Then they didn't. Denanisha dropped out. Not dramatically. Not with a speech or a slammed door. She just stopped going, walked into the counselor's office on a Monday, said she needed to take care of her mama, and signed the withdrawal papers with a pen that was almost out of ink. She was 17. She counted coins on the kitchen floor that night. Quarters, dimes, nickels, a few pennies so worn you couldn't read the year. Enough for half a bottle of blood pressure medication. Not enough for the whole thing. Her first job was bussing tables at a barbecue joint on Elvis Presley Boulevard. She wore shoes from the neighbor's donation pile. 2 sizes too big. She stuffed newspaper into the toes so they wouldn't slip. The paper went soft by lunchtime from the sweat, and she'd replace it with napkins from the dispenser when nobody was looking. She never complained. Not once. She worked. That's what she did. That's who she was. She worked the way her mother worked. Quiet. Relentless. Without expectation of applause. At 26, she had Zuri. The father's name was Deshaun. He was charming and funny, and he held Denisha's hand in the delivery room and cried when Zuri came out screaming. He said he'd stay. He said he'd be different from every man who'd ever left. He said a lot of things. He was gone before Zuri learned to walk. Denanisha didn't chase him. Didn't call. Didn't beg. She just shifted Zuri to her other hip and kept moving. She got the job at Raylan's Diner because it was close to the apartment, and the morning shift meant she could be home by the time Zuri got back from school. Every morning, 4:45. Alarm goes off. Feet on the cold floor. She packs Zuri's lunch in a plastic container with a cracked lid she'd taped shut with packing tape. Peanut butter sandwich. Apple slices. A juice box if they were on sale that week. She writes a note on a napkin and tucks it inside. Little things. You're my favorite human. Smile big today. I love you more than naps. She drives to the diner in a car that needs new brakes and makes a sound like a cat in pain every time she turns left. She ties her apron. She starts the coffee. She wipes down the tables. And at 6:47 the bell rings. That was Denisha's life. Small, hard, ordinary. And she held it together with tape and napkin notes and 4 hours of sleep. Opel May Dawson taught 4th grade at Carver Elementary in North Memphis for 38 years. 38 years of multiplication tables and spelling bees and children who came to school hungry. She kept a drawer full of granola bars in her desk. Bottom left. The children knew. She never announced it. They just knew. Her husband, Curtis Dawson, fixed pipes. That's how he said it. Not plumber, not contractor. I fix pipes. He was a big man with rough hands and a laugh that started in his belly and filled whatever room he was standing in. He could fix anything. Leaky faucets, burst mains, clogged drains that nobody else would touch. He smelled like copper and pipe grease and the peppermint candy he always kept in his shirt pocket. They were never rich. Not even close. They bought a small wood frame house on Delwood Avenue and paid the mortgage for 30 years. The monthly payment was $287. Opel could still recite that number in her sleep. Curtis died 9 years ago. Lung cancer. The kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already won. He died 11 months before the last mortgage payment. Opel paid it with her teacher's pension, wrote the check at the kitchen table, signed her name, sealed the envelope. Then she sat in the quiet house and realized there was no one to tell. No one to say, "We did it, baby. The house is ours." She had one son, Randall. He lived in Atlanta. Worked in insurance or finance or something with numbers. Opel was never quite sure. He called once a month. The calls lasted 3 minutes, sometimes 4. He always asked if she needed anything. She always said no. He always sounded relieved. She didn't blame Randall. He had his own life, his own weight to carry. But the silence in the house after Curtis left was a living thing. It sat in the chair across from her at dinner. It slept on his side of the bed. It followed her from room to room like a dog that wouldn't leave. For 3 years after Curtis passed, Opel cooked dinner for 2. Set 2 plates, 2 forks, 2 glasses of sweet tea. She'd eat her portion and leave his untouched until morning. Then she'd scrape it into the trash, wash both plates, and do it again the next evening. It took her 3 years to stop. Not because she forgot he was gone, because she finally ran out of ways to pretend he wasn't. The diner saved her. Not the food. The food was average at best. The coffee was too strong, and the toast was always a shade past golden. But booth number 4 had something her kitchen table didn't. People. The clatter of dishes. The hiss of the griddle. The bell above the door that rang every time someone walked in. And Denanisha. Denanisha, who said "Morning, Miss Opel," like she meant it. Denanisha, who remembered her order. Denanisha, who refilled her coffee without being asked and never once rushed her to leave. At home, Opel was invisible. A 78-year-old woman in a paid-off house with a phone that barely rang. But at booth number 4, someone saw her. Someone acknowledged that she existed, that she was still here, still breathing, still worth a good morning. Every day before she left the house, Opel stood in front of the hallway dresser. Curtis's photograph sat on top in a brass frame that needed polishing. He was smiling in the picture, always smiling. She'd press her fingertips against the glass, just over his cheek, and whisper the same 3 words, "I'll be back, baby." Then she'd pick up her purse, lock the front door, and drive to the diner in the old Buick that Curtis had maintained himself and that she now paid a mechanic $40 a month to keep running. Booth number 4, coffee black, 1 egg, 1 toast, and a $2 bill folded into a triangle. The first year, Opel was just a regular. Booth 4, same order, $2 tip. Denanisha didn't think much of it. People have habits. Some folks sit in the same pew at church every Sunday. Some folks park in the same spot at the grocery store even when the lot is empty. Opel had her booth. That was that. Then Denanisha started showing. Just barely. A slight roundness under the apron that she tried to hide by tying it higher. She didn't mention it. Not to the other waitresses, not to the manager, definitely not to the old woman at booth 4. But Opel noticed. She didn't say a word. Didn't ask who the father was. Didn't offer advice. Didn't do any of the things people do when they spot a pregnant woman and suddenly forget about boundaries. She just started leaving $3 instead of 2? $3. Folded into the same triangle, tucked under the same plate, every morning for 3 months. When Denanisha came back after having Zuri after 6 weeks of maternity leave she couldn't afford, and 2 weeks of unpaid time she definitely couldn't afford, the tip went back to $2. Just like that. No explanation. No conversation. Like it had never changed. Neither of them ever mentioned it. By year 3, Zuri started coming to the diner on Saturday mornings. Denanisha couldn't afford a sitter on weekends, so Zuri sat in the booth closest to the kitchen with a coloring book and a cup of orange juice and strict instructions to stay put. Opel noticed. Of course she noticed. The next Saturday she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a peppermint. Not a store-bought peppermint in a plastic wrapper. A handmade one rolled tight and wrapped in a small square of wax paper the way grandmothers used to do it before everything came in packages. Zuri's eyes went wide. "Can I?" Mama Denanisha looked at Opel. Opel gave the smallest nod. Denanisha nodded back. After that Zuri called her the Candy Lady. Every Saturday, "Is the Candy Lady here yet?" she'd ask, bouncing on the vinyl seat. And every Saturday Opel had a peppermint in her pocket, wrapped in wax paper, waiting. And under the plate, the $2 triangle. Year 4. Denisha's hours got cut. The diner was slow. The owner talked about maybe closing on Mondays, maybe cutting the breakfast shift short. Denanisha picked up evening work at a sandwich shop across town. 2 jobs. 1 kid. No car that could be trusted past 40 miles an hour. One morning, she forgot to smile. Not on purpose. She didn't even realize it. She poured Opel's coffee and set down the plate and said, "Morning, Miss Opel," but the warmth was missing. The voice was flat. The eyes were somewhere else. Opel didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't pry. She didn't offer a speech about staying strong or trusting the process or any of the hollow things people say when they can see someone drowning but don't know how to swim. She just wrote 5 words on a napkin with a ballpoint pen from her purse. The handwriting was shaky, the letters leaned slightly to the right. She folded the napkin once and left it under the $2 triangle. Denisha found it when she cleared the table. She unfolded it, standing right there in the middle of the diner with a bus tub on her hip. Hard days don't last, hard women do. She read it twice, folded it back up, put it in her apron pocket next to the $2, and finished her shift. She still has that napkin. Year 5. Opel missed a day, then another, then a week, then 2 weeks. 14 mornings where booth number 4 sat empty, and the coffee Denisha poured at 6:45 went cold. Denisha didn't have her phone number, didn't have her address, didn't even know her last name until a regular mentioned he'd seen Miss Dawson at the pharmacy once. 6 years, and Denisha realized she didn't know how to find the woman who'd sat across from her every morning like clockwork. When Opel came back, she was thinner. The coat hung looser on her shoulders. She walked slower, gripping the edge of the booth as she lowered herself onto the seat. Her left hand shook worse than before. The coffee sloshed when she raised the mug. Denisha set down the plate. 1 egg, 1 toast. Missed you, Miss Opel. Missed being here, baby. That was all. No explanation, no details, no story about where she'd been or why. Opel picked up her fork. Denisha went back to the counter. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, and under the plate, folded sharp and deliberate as ever, the $2 triangle. The letter from the dentist came on a Thursday. Zuri needed braces. Not the cosmetic kind. The kind where the jaw doesn't line up right, and the back teeth grind into each other, and if you wait too long, the damage becomes permanent. The estimate sat on the kitchen counter for 3 days before Denisha opened it. She already knew it would be bad. She just didn't know the number yet. $3,200. Insurance covered none of it. The letter explained the payment plan options in cheerful blue font, like they were offering a vacation package instead of a debt sentence. Denisha folded the letter and put it in the drawer with the others. The transmission went 2 weeks later. She was driving home from the sandwich shop's second shift, 11:15 at night. The car shuddered at a red light on Elvis Presley Boulevard, made a sound like something metal grinding against something else metal, and then stopped moving. Just stopped. In the middle of the intersection. She sat there with the hazard lights clicking while cars honked and swerved around her. $900 to fix it. The mechanic said it like he was sorry, which meant he probably could have charged more. Then the rent letter. The landlord was raising it $150 a month starting next month. No negotiation, no apology. Just a printed notice taped to her door when she got home, right next to the crayon drawing Zuri had stuck there with a piece of Scotch tape. A drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands, one tall, one small, both smiling. Denisha sat on the kitchen floor at 11 o'clock that night. Bills spread around her in a half circle. The electric bill, the water bill, the rent notice, the dentist letter, the mechanic's estimate scrawled on the back of a receipt. She had a pocket calculator from the dollar store. The buttons were sticky. The display was cracked in one corner. She added everything up. Then she subtracted what she had. Then she added it up again, slower this time, like maybe the numbers would rearrange themselves if she was more careful. They didn't. The total was -$412. That was the gap between what she owed and what she earned. $412 she didn't have and couldn't get and couldn't borrow because there was nobody left to borrow from. She put the calculator down on the linoleum, turned off the kitchen light, and lay down right there on the floor on her back, staring at the ceiling she couldn't see in the dark. The floor was cold. It smelled like the pine cleaner she used every Sunday. She could hear Zuri breathing through the thin wall of the bedroom. She didn't cry. She never did. She just lay there and let the numbers run circles in her head until her body gave up and shut down and something that barely passed for sleep pulled her under. 4:45. The alarm went off. Her back ached from the floor. Her neck was stiff. The kitchen light was still off. She stood up in the dark, stepped over the bills, and walked to the counter. She made Zuri's lunch. Peanut butter sandwich. Apple slices. Juice box. The plastic container with the cracked lid. She pressed the packing tape down firm, smoothed it with her thumb, and tucked the napkin note inside. "You're braver than you think, baby girl." Then she tied her apron, grabbed her keys, and drove to the diner in a car that now made a new sound every time she turned the wheel. a grinding, scraping whisper, like the car was begging her to stop. She didn't stop. She never stopped. Something was different about Opel. It started small, so small that Denanisha almost missed it. The bell rang at 7:02 instead of 6:47. 15 minutes late. Opel had never been 15 minutes late. Not in 5.5 years. Not in rain, not in August heat, not on the morning after the ice storm that shut down half of Memphis. But there she was, 7:02, walking a little slower than usual, gripping the doorframe for a half second before stepping inside. Denanisha noticed the grip. She didn't say anything. The next week, Opel forgot the toast, ordered the egg and the coffee, but didn't mention the toast. Denanisha brought it anyway. Opel looked at it like she was surprised to see it. Then she smiled and picked up her fork. But the pause was there. A half-beat of blankness that hadn't existed before. Her left hand shook worse now. The coffee sloshed over the rim when she lifted the mug. A brown puddle formed in the saucer. Opel used to wipe it with her napkin neat and quick. Now she didn't seem to notice it was there. The puddle just sat cooling, spreading to the edge of the saucer. Denanisha refilled the mug a little less full after that. She didn't explain why. Opel didn't ask. There were other things. Opel wore the same gray cardigan 3 days in a row. She left her purse unzipped, which she never did. Once she called Denanisha baby twice in the same sentence like she'd forgotten she'd already said it. Then one Tuesday morning between the egg and the coffee, Opel said something she'd never said before. "You ever think about going back to school?" Denanisha stopped mid-pour. The question came out of nowhere. No lead-up, no context. Just 5 words dropped onto the table like coins. Denanisha laughed. Not a real laugh. The kind you use when someone asks you something so far from your reality that the only honest response is disbelief. "Miss Opel, I don't even have time to sleep right." Opel nodded slowly. She picked up her coffee, took a sip, set it down, but her eyes stayed on Denanisha. Longer than usual, longer than comfortable, like she was memorizing something. Like she was measuring the distance between what Denanisha was and what Denanisha could be. She didn't say another word about it. She finished her egg, folded her napkin, and placed the $2 triangle under the plate. But Denanisha felt those eyes on her for the rest of the morning, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Opel had just asked her a question that wasn't really a question. It was more like a door, one that Opel was trying to open from the other side. Zuri's school called on a Wednesday afternoon. Not the front office. The teacher, Miss Coleman. She asked if she could speak with Denanisha about something Zuri had said during Career Day. Denisha's stomach dropped. Career Day was the kind of school event she always forgot about until the night before, then scrambled to help Zuri prepare something while packing lunches and folding laundry and checking the homework. She was too tired to actually read. "Is everything okay?" Denanisha asked, pressing the phone between her ear and shoulder, a bus tub balanced on her hip in the diner's back hallway. "More than okay," Miss Coleman said. "I just thought you should know what Zuri shared with the class. Each student had been asked to talk about someone they admired, someone they looked up to. Most kids picked athletes or singers or characters from movies. Zuri picked her mother. She stood in front of the class and said her mama wakes up before the sun every day to make her lunch. She said her mama writes notes on napkins and puts them in her lunchbox. She said her mama works 2 jobs and never complains and always smells like coffee and always says I love you before bed, even when she's so tired her eyes are already closed." Miss Coleman paused. Her voice softened. But then she said something else. She talked about a woman she calls the Candy Lady, an old woman who comes to the diner where her mother works. She said the Candy Lady brings her peppermints wrapped in paper. She said the Candy Lady always smiles at her. And she said, "My mama takes care of everybody, but the Candy Lady takes care of my mama. She just doesn't know it." Denanisha didn't say anything. The hallway was narrow. The fluorescent light above the supply closet buzzed. Someone dropped a plate in the kitchen, and a voice cursed softly. The phone was warm against her ear. "Miss Holloway, are you still there?" "I'm here," Denanisha said. Her voice was steady. "Barely. I just wanted you to know. It was a beautiful presentation." The whole class was quiet when she finished. That doesn't happen often with 8-year-olds. Denanisha thanked her, hung up, stood in the hallway for a long time. She reached into her apron pocket. The $2 bill from this morning was still there, warm from being pressed against her body all day. She held it between her fingers, looked at it, and then slowly, carefully folded it into a small triangle. She didn't know why she did it. It wasn't a decision. It was something closer to instinct. Like her hands already knew something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. She slipped the triangle back into her pocket and went back to work. The first time Curtis Dawson left $2 on a table, he and Opel had been married for exactly 19 days. They were broke. Not the kind of broke where you cut back on extras. The kind where you sit in the car after filling up the tank and do the math on whether you can still afford milk. They'd spent everything on the wedding, which wasn't much to begin with. 32 guests in the fellowship hall of Mount Zion Baptist. Paper plates. Punch bowl borrowed from the church. Opal's dress was her mother's, taken in at the waist and let out at the hem. But they were married. And Curtis wanted to take his wife out. Just once, just to sit across from her in a restaurant and order food off a menu like people do in the movies. He found a diner on the north side of town. Not a restaurant. A diner. Vinyl booths, coffee in ceramic mugs, a jukebox in the corner playing Otis Redding so low you could barely hear it over the griddle. The kind of place where the waitress called you hun and the pie was better than the entrees. They split a plate of meatloaf. 1 plate, 2 forks. Opel had sweet tea. Curtis had water because water was free. The bill came to $7.50. Curtis reached into his wallet. He had a 10. And behind the 10, a $2 bill his uncle had given him for luck on his wedding day. He put the 10 on the table for the bill. Then he took out the 2. He held it for a moment. Then he did something Opel had never seen him do. He folded the bill carefully, deliberately, into a small, precise triangle, like a flag being folded at a funeral, like something sacred. He slid the triangle under the edge of the plate and left it there. Curtis, Opel said, "That's all the cash we have left. I know, we barely have enough for ourselves." Curtis looked at her across the table. The yellow diner light caught the sweat on his forehead and the grease stain on his collar that he hadn't been able to get out. His hands were rough, knuckles scarred from pipe wrenches and copper fittings, but his eyes were soft. "You see that girl?" He nodded toward their waitress. "Young, maybe 19. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. She's been on her feet all night. Probably got a kid at home. Probably got bills she can't pay." "We got bills we can't pay," Opel said. "Exactly," Curtis said. "So we know what it feels like, and if you only give when you have enough, you'll never give at all." He said it simply, like he was stating the weather, like it was obvious, like the idea of keeping $2 for yourself when someone else might need it was the strangest thing in the world. Opel looked at the triangle on the table. Then she looked at her husband. Then she picked up her purse and didn't say another word about it. They went back to that diner every month when they could afford it, and every time Curtis left $2, folded into a triangle, tucked under the plate. It didn't matter if the service was good or bad, didn't matter if they were flush or scraping by. $2, triangle, every time. When they went to nicer places years later, when Curtis's plumbing business was steady and Opel's teaching salary added a second income, the tip went up. But the $2 triangle stayed, always separate from the regular tip, always folded the same way, always placed in the same spot. "What's with the triangle?" a waiter asked once, years into their marriage. Curtis grinned. "That's between me and my wife." It became their thing. The silent language of a 42-year marriage. The $2 was never about the money. It was about the promise underneath it, the belief that you give what you can, when you can, to whoever's standing in front of you, even when you're the one who needs help. Curtis died on a Sunday morning. Opel was holding his hand. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and the peppermints he'd kept in his pocket until the very last week when he was too weak to unwrap them. She unwrapped the last one for him. He couldn't eat it, but he smiled when he smelled it. The next morning, Opel drove to a diner. Not the one from their first date. That place had closed years ago. She drove to Raylan's Diner in South Memphis because it was close, and because it was open, and because she needed to sit across from someone, anyone, and pretend the world hadn't just collapsed. She ordered coffee. Black, no sugar. She drank it slowly. And when she was done, she reached into her purse and pulled out a $2 bill. She folded it into a triangle. placed it under the saucer, and walked out. The next morning, she did it again, and the morning after that, and every morning for 6 years. It was never a tip. It was a conversation with a man who wasn't there anymore. A way of saying, I remember. I'm still here. I'm still giving. The way you taught me. Every triangle was a love letter. Every $2 was a prayer. And the waitress who picked them up every morning had no idea what she was holding. The doctor had told her in March. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The kind that doesn't negotiate. The kind that gives you a number and means it. 3 to 5 months. Maybe 6 if she was lucky. Opel had never considered herself particularly lucky, but she'd never considered herself unlucky either. She was just a woman who showed up, and now there was a clock on the showing up, and she had things to do before it stopped. She didn't tell Randall. He'd fly down from Atlanta and hover and make phone calls and try to fix it, and there was nothing to fix. She didn't tell Denanisha. She didn't tell the women at church or the man at the pharmacy who always asked how she was doing. She told no one. Because telling people meant watching their faces change, and she didn't have time for other people's grief. She was too busy with her own. The kitchen table had a burn mark near the left edge, a dark oval scar in the wood from the time Curtis set a hot Dutch oven down without a trivet. She'd fussed at him for an hour. He'd kissed her forehead and said, now the table's got character. She ran her finger over the mark every time she sat down. It was smooth from years of touching. She sat there now in the evening with the overhead light casting a yellow circle on the table. A pen in her right hand. A sheet of lined yellow paper in front of her. The kind of paper she'd used for lesson plans for 38 years. She still bought it by the pad at the office supply store, even though she had no lessons left to plan. She wrote, slowly. Her hand shook. The letters slanted and stumbled across the lines like children learning to walk. She stopped often, not because she didn't know what to say, but because her hand wouldn't keep up with her heart. She'd been working on this letter for 2 weeks, writing a paragraph, reading it, tearing it up, starting again. The wastebasket beside the table was full of crumpled yellow pages, each one an attempt to say something that words weren't built to carry. Beside the letter sat a manila envelope. Old, soft at the edges, the same kind Curtis used to bring home on Fridays with his weekly pay folded inside. She'd kept a box of them in the hall closet for decades. This one she'd chosen carefully. No tears, no stains. Just worn in the way that honest things get worn. She finished the last line. Set the pen down. Read the whole letter once, start to finish. Her lips moved but no sound came out. Then she folded it in thirds, slow, precise, the way you fold something that matters. She placed the letter inside the envelope, then a check, then a small, flat piece of paper sealed in plastic. She pressed them all flat with the heel of her palm and sealed the envelope with a strip of tape because the glue had long since dried out. She slid the envelope into the inside pocket of her coat. The navy blue cardigan that Curtis had given her for her 69th birthday. The one she saved for important days. She smoothed the pocket flat with both hands and held them there for a moment over her heart, over the envelope, over everything she'd put inside it. Then she looked up. Curtis smiled from the brass frame on the hallway dresser. The same smile. Always the same. I found her, baby, Opel whispered. The one who reminds me of us. She turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. Tomorrow was the day. The bell rang at 6:47. Denanisha looked up. For the first time in years, she looked up when the bell rang. Something made her look. Something she couldn't name. Opel stood in the doorway. But she looked different. Not different like something was wrong. Different like something was finished. Her hair was brushed smooth and pinned back with a small silver clip Denanisha had never seen before. She wore the navy cardigan buttoned all the way up. She carried a handbag instead of the small wallet she usually tucked under her arm. The handbag was brown, leather, old but polished. The kind you take to church or to the bank or to the last place you're ever going to go. She walked to booth 4, sat down, placed the handbag beside her on the seat. Morning, Miss Opel. Morning, baby. The same words, but slower, like she was tasting them. Denanisha brought the coffee. Black, no sugar. The chipped mug with the faded logo. Opel wrapped both hands around it and held it without drinking. just held it, like the warmth was the point. She ordered the usual: 1 egg, 1 toast. Denisha brought it out and set it down gently. Opel picked up her fork, but she didn't eat the way she usually ate. She ate like someone who was paying attention to every bite, like someone who wanted to remember what toast tasted like. She looked out the window, watched the cars on Lamar Avenue, watched the light shift across the table, turning the Formica almost gold. She stayed in that light longer than usual. Let it sit on her hands. "Zuri still like peppermints?" she asked, without turning from the window. Denisha smiled. "She'd eat them for breakfast if I let her." Opel nodded, a small nod, more to herself than to anyone. Then silence. Opel watched Denisha work, watched her wipe down the counter, refill the coffee maker, carry plates to table 6, laugh at something the cook said through the kitchen window, watched her tuck a strand of hair behind her ear and blow a loose breath upward to cool her face. Watched her the way you watch something you want to keep. When the plate was empty, Opel folded her napkin. Once, twice, set it on the plate. She reached into her purse and pulled out the $2 bill, folded it into a triangle, placed it under the edge of the plate. The crease was sharp. The point was perfect. Then she reached into the inside pocket of the navy cardigan and pulled out the manila envelope. She set it beside the triangle, gently, like it was made of something that could break. She didn't write anything on it, didn't say anything about it, just placed it there next to the last $2 she would ever fold and pressed her fingertips against the table for one long breath. Then she stood up. She picked up her handbag, straightened her cardigan, took one more look at booth number 4, at the chipped mug, at the window, at the gold light that was already sliding away. She walked to the door, pushed it open. The bell rang. She stepped through. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't look back. Denisha watched through the glass. Opel crossed the parking lot slowly, her back slightly bent, her silver hair catching the early sun. She reached her car, opened the door, paused for a moment with one hand on the roof, looking up at the sky like she was checking something. Then she got in and drove away. The parking lot was empty. The bell stopped ringing, and on the table next to the $2 triangle, the envelope sat waiting. Denisha didn't open it right away. She picked it up when she cleared the table, felt the weight of it, heavier than a card, thicker than a note. She turned it over. No name on the front, no writing at all. Just a plain manila envelope, old and soft, sealed with a strip of tape that had been pressed down carefully. She slipped it into her apron pocket next to the $2 triangle and kept working. There were tables to clear, coffee to pour, orders to call in. The morning rush was building, and the cook was already behind, and the other waitress had called in sick, which meant Denisha was covering the whole floor alone. She worked through it the way she always did, fast, steady, without complaint. The envelope pressed against her hip with every step, and she was aware of it the way you're aware of a sound you can't identify. Present, constant, waiting. Her shift ended at 2. She clocked out, hung up her apron, and walked into the break room. It was small, a row of dented lockers along one wall, a plastic chair with a cracked seat, a folding table with a microwave that smelled permanently of burnt popcorn. The fluorescent light buzzed. One of the ceiling tiles was stained brown from a leak that nobody had fixed. She sat in the plastic chair, pulled the envelope from the apron she draped over her lap, held it with both hands. She opened it slowly, peeled the tape back, reached inside. The letter came out first. Yellow-lined paper. The same kind Miss Opel must have used her whole life. The handwriting was shaky, blue-black ink. Some words pressed hard into the paper, others barely there, like the hand that wrote them was fighting against itself. Denisha read it slowly. Opel wrote about a man named Curtis, her husband, a pipe fixer with rough hands and a laugh that filled rooms. She wrote about a diner on the north side of town 42 years ago, a plate of meatloaf, a bill for $7.50, and a $2 tip folded into a triangle by a man who had nothing left in his wallet but gave it anyway. She wrote what Curtis said that night, the words that became the foundation of everything they built together. That giving wasn't something you did when you had enough, because if you waited for enough, you'd never start. She wrote that she'd been watching Denisha for 6 years, that she saw the way Denanisha poured coffee with steady hands, even when her eyes were red from no sleep. The way she smiled at every customer, even on the days when smiling took everything she had. The way she packed lunches for Zuri, with tape on the lid and love notes on napkins. She wrote that Denanisha reminded her of Curtis. Not because they looked alike or talked alike, but because they both gave without keeping score. Because they both showed up every day, without expecting anything in return. And they never once acted like that was special. She wrote that she was sick. That the sickness had a name and a timeline, and that both were final. She wrote that she was not afraid, that Curtis was waiting, that the only thing she needed to do before she went was make sure the $2 triangle didn't stop. Below the letter, Denanisha found the check. A personal check from a Memphis credit union written in the same shaking hand. The number on it was $47,000. In the memo line in letters so small Denanisha had to hold the paper close to read them. For Zuri's future, and yours, Curtis would have wanted this. $47,000. A retired teacher's lifetime of saving. Everything left after 30 years of mortgage payments and grocery bills, and a funeral she'd paid for herself because Randall offered to help, but Opel said no, she'd handle it the way she'd handled everything since Curtis left. Below the check, one more thing. A small, flat piece of paper sealed in plastic. A photocopy of a $2 bill creased and faded with a fold line running through the center where it had once been pressed into a triangle. The original. The very first one. The one Curtis left on a table 42 years ago for a waitress he'd never see again. Opel had kept it. All this time. Laminated it. Carried it. And now she was giving it away. The letter slipped from Denanisha's fingers. It floated down to the linoleum floor of the break room and landed face up, the blue-black ink, staring at the stained ceiling tile. Denisha's back hit the locker behind her. She slid down until she was sitting on the floor, knees pulled up, the envelope pressed against her chest with both hands. The check was inside. The photocopy was inside. 42 years of love and 6 years of $2 triangles were inside. Her shoulders shook. No sound, just shaking. The fluorescent light buzzed. The microwave hummed. Somewhere in the kitchen a plate clattered. She sat there on the break room floor for a long time. She didn't move. Denanisha was on her feet before she'd finished thinking. She grabbed her jacket from the locker, stuffed the envelope into the inside pocket, pulled out her phone, and realized what she'd known for 6 years but never thought to question. She didn't have Opel's number, didn't have her address, didn't have anything except a name, a booth, and a $2 triangle. She went to the front of the diner, asked the regulars, the man who came every morning for biscuits and gravy, the couple who split a short stack on Tuesdays, the mailman who stopped in for coffee on his route, the old lady at booth 4, Miss Opel. They all knew her. Everyone knew her. But nobody knew where she lived. Nobody had her phone number. She came alone. She left alone. 6 years of showing up, and she'd remained a stranger to everyone except the woman who poured her coffee. Denanisha drove to the post office 3 blocks from the diner, the one on Lamar Avenue with the flag out front that was always slightly crooked. She walked in and stood in line behind a woman mailing a box to California and a man buying a money order. The clerk was a heavy-set woman with reading glasses on a chain. Denanisha described Opel, small, elderly, silver hair, came in on Tuesdays for stamps. The clerk's face softened. Miss Dawson. Yes, I know her. She buys stamps every Tuesday. Always the same ones. The flag stamps. She told me once she likes writing letters even though nobody writes back. The clerk couldn't give Denanisha the address. Policy. But she said something that helped. She said Opel lived on Delwood Avenue, the White House with the tulips. You can't miss it. It's the only one on the block with flowers. Denanisha drove to Delwood Avenue. It was a quiet street on the north side. Small houses, chain-link fences, cracked sidewalks with grass growing through. Most of the yards were bare dirt or patchy brown lawns. But at the end of the block on the left side, there it was. A small wood frame house. White paint peeling at the corners, curling away from the clapboard in long, tired strips. A low fence, a narrow concrete path leading to the front porch. And in the flower bed along the front, a row of tulips, red and yellow. bright against the fading paint, the only color on the whole block. Denisha walked up the path. The porch steps creaked. She knocked on the front door. Waited. Knocked again. The house was quiet. The curtains were drawn. A newspaper sat on the mat still in its plastic sleeve. Yesterday's date. She knocked a third time. Nothing. The neighbor's door opened. A man in a plaid shirt, maybe 60, holding a coffee cup. "You looking for Miss Dawson?" "Yes, sir." "Do you know where she is?" The man's face changed. Not dramatically. Just a small shift around the eyes, the way people's faces move when they're about to deliver news they wish they didn't have. "Ambulance came 2 days ago," he said. "Took her to hospice. Baptist Memorial, I think. The hospice wing." Denisha's stomach dropped. Her hand went to her jacket pocket. The envelope was still there. Heavy. Warm from her body. 2 days ago, Tuesday morning. Real early. Before sunrise. Tuesday. The day Opel always bought stamps. The day she liked to write letters that nobody answered. Denisha was back in her car before the neighbor finished talking. She turned the key. The engine made that grinding sound. She didn't care. She pulled away from the curb and drove south toward Baptist Memorial, both hands on the wheel, the envelope in her pocket, the $2 triangle in her apron that she'd forgotten to take off, and a question burning in her chest that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with time. She might already be too late. The hospice wing at Baptist Memorial smelled like floor wax and something floral that was trying too hard to be comforting. The hallways were wide and quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your footsteps sound like apologies. Denisha held Zuri's hand. Zuri held a small paper bundle in the other. She'd made it that morning without being asked. A peppermint rolled tight wrapped in a square of wax paper, just the way the candy lady used to do it. Room 114. The door was open halfway. Denisha knocked on the frame 2 soft taps, and a nurse looked up from inside. "Are you family? I'm her waitress," Denisha said. And then, because that sounded too small for what she meant, she added, "She comes to my diner every morning. 6 years." The nurse studied her face for a moment. Then she stepped aside. Opel was lying in a bed that seemed 3 sizes too big for her. She'd shrunk. That was the first thing Denisha noticed. The woman who sat in booth 4 every morning, who held her coffee mug with quiet authority, who walked in at 6:47 like the world owed her punctuality, was now small enough to disappear into the white sheets. The navy blue cardigan was folded neatly on the chair beside the bed. On top of it, Opel's purse. On top of the purse, a pair of reading glasses she never wore at the diner. Her eyes were closed. Then they weren't. "Well," Opel said, her voice thin but steady. "You found me." Denisha stood at the foot of the bed, unable to move. Her throat was tight. Her hands were shaking. She opened her mouth, and nothing came out. "Come sit down, baby," Opel said. "I don't bite. Especially not now." Denisha sat in the chair beside the bed. Zuri stood behind her, peeking around her mother's shoulder, still holding the peppermint. "I read your letter, Miss Opel. I figured you would. I can't take that money." "You already did. Check's been cashed the moment I signed it. Ain't no giving it back." Silence. The machines hummed. Somewhere down the hallway a phone rang twice and stopped. "Why me?" Denisha asked. Her voice cracked. "You have a son. You have family. Why would you give everything to a waitress at a diner?" Opel turned her head on the pillow. Slowly, like the movement cost her something. She looked at Denisha the way she'd looked at her that morning in the diner when she'd asked about going back to school. Measuring, knowing. "Randall has enough," she said. "He's got a good job. Got a house with 3 bathrooms. He doesn't need my money. He needs my time, and I should have given more of that when I had it. But that's a different regret for a different day." She paused, took a breath. The machine beside her bed beeped softly. "You have something Randall doesn't. You have the heart Curtis had. The kind that gives when there's nothing left to give. The kind that shows up at 4:45 in the morning and packs a lunch with a cracked lid and writes love notes on napkins. That's not common, baby. That's rare. And I wanted to make sure someone keeps that heart beating. Not just surviving. Beating." Denisha pressed her lips together. Her chin trembled. She reached out and took Opel's hand. Both hands. The way you hold something precious and fragile, and yours. Opel's fingers were cold, but they gripped back. Firm. Surprising. Curtis would have loved you, Opel said. He would have sat in that diner and left you $2 every day just like I did. And he would have said you were worth a whole lot more. You're worth a whole lot more too, Miss Opel. I know that, baby. I'm just glad somebody finally said it. Zuri stepped forward. She held out the small wax paper bundle. The peppermint, rolled tight, wrapped carefully, the way a child wraps something when she wants it to be perfect. I made it like you make them, Zuri said. For you. Opel looked at the peppermint. Then she looked at Zuri. And something happened that Denanisha had never seen in 6 years. Opel smiled. Not the small, polite smile she gave at the diner. Not the nod and sip smile over coffee. A real smile. The kind that starts somewhere deep and rises all the way to the eyes and sits there glowing like a light that finally found a window. She took the peppermint from Zuri's hand, held it close to her nose, breathed in. Smells just right, she whispered. Zuri beamed. Opel looked at the small bundle in her hand, then at Zuri, then at Denanisha. She closed her eyes and leaned back against the pillow, the peppermint resting on her chest right above her heart. There it is, she said softly. Almost to herself, almost to Curtis. That's what $2 can do. 11 days later, Opel May Dawson passed away. It happened at 6:47 inches the morning. The nurses noted the time on the chart. They didn't know why it mattered. They didn't know about the bell above the diner door, or the booth by the window, or the gold light on the Formica table that lasted exactly 20 minutes each morning. They just wrote the number down and moved on. Denanisha was pouring coffee when the phone rang. The diner's landline. Nobody ever called the landline. She picked it up with one hand, the coffee pot in the other, and listened. She set the pot down on the counter. Slowly. The way you set something down when your hands stop working and your brain hasn't caught up yet. She walked to the break room, closed the door, sat down on the floor. Same spot. Same linoleum. Same buzzing fluorescent light overhead. She reached into her apron pocket. The $2 bill was there. The last one Opel had ever folded. Denanisha had kept it. Not spent it. Not deposited it. Just carried it every day in the left pocket of her apron next to the napkin notes she wrote for Zuri. She held the bill between her fingers. Looked at it. Then, slowly, carefully, she folded it into a triangle. The crease was sharp, the point was clean. She pressed it flat against her palm and held it there. The fluorescent light buzzed. The diner sounds leaked through the door. Dishes, voices, the bell ringing as someone walked in. 6, 4, 7. 2 years passed. Denanisha got her GED on a Tuesday evening in May. She studied for it at the kitchen table after Zuri went to bed using a prep book she bought for $6 at the thrift store on Lamar Avenue. The pages were dog-eared and someone had written notes in the margins in green ink. She passed on the first try. She enrolled in the nursing program at Southwest Tennessee Community College that fall. The $47,000 didn't cover everything. It covered enough. Enough to pay for tuition and books, and keep the lights on while she cut back to one shift. Enough to fix the car. Enough to get Zuri's braces. Enough to stop waking up at 3 in the morning with numbers running circles in her head. It wasn't a miracle. It was a margin. Just enough space between drowning and breathing for Denanisha to lift her head and look forward instead of down. Zuri got her braces off the following spring. She smiled so wide in the photo that Denanisha taped to the refrigerator that you could count every single tooth. She was 10 now. Taller. Louder. Still packing peppermints in wax paper. She brought them to school and gave them to the kids who looked like they were having bad days. The teacher called Denanisha about it once. Not to complain. To say that Zuri had given a peppermint to a boy who'd been crying at lunch and he'd stopped crying and eaten his food? She calls herself the candy lady, the teacher said, laughing. Denanisha didn't laugh. She pressed the phone to her ear and closed her eyes and stood very still in the diner hallway for a long time. Denanisha still worked at Raylan's. Morning shift. 6 days a week. She'd go to class in the afternoons, come home, cook dinner, help Zuri with homework, study, sleep. The schedule was brutal, but it was a different kind of brutal than before. Before, the work led nowhere. Now it led somewhere. And that changed everything. Booth number 4 stayed empty. Nobody sat there. Not because there was a sign or a rope or a rule, just because the regulars knew. The biscuits and gravy man knew. The Tuesday couple knew. Even new customers seemed to sense it. Something about the empty booth felt occupied, like the absence was a presence. Every morning before the first customer walked in, before the bell rang, before the coffee was poured, Denanisha set a cup on the table at booth 4, a white ceramic mug with a faded Tennessee Volunteers logo chipped at the rim. She filled it with coffee. Black, no sugar. She set it down. She didn't say anything, didn't pray, didn't perform. She just placed the cup where it had always been placed, and then she walked away and started her shift. The coffee was always cold by the time she cleared it. She poured it out every morning, and every morning she poured a fresh one. The graduation ceremony was held in the gymnasium at Southwest Tennessee on a Saturday afternoon in June. Plastic chairs on a basketball court. A podium with a microphone that squeaked. The air conditioning was losing the fight against 200 bodies in the Memphis summer. Denanisha sat in the third row, in a blue cap and gown. The gown was too long. She'd pinned the hem with safety pins that morning so she wouldn't trip. Her shoes were new, the first pair of new shoes she'd bought herself in 4 years. Zuri sat in the bleachers, 10th row. She was holding a sign she'd made from poster board and markers. Big block letters, "That's my mama." She held it above her head with both hands, arms straight, elbows locked like she was holding up the roof. The seat next to Zuri was empty. When they called Denanisha's name, she walked across the stage, took the diploma, shook the hand, smiled for the camera, walked back to her seat and pressed the folder against her chest. She drove to the diner after, still wearing the cap and gown. Zuri in the passenger seat, the poster board sign folded on her lap. The car still made the grinding sound when she turned left. She didn't care. The diner was closed. Saturday afternoon, nobody inside. She used her key, pushed open the door. The bell rang. She walked to booth 4. She stood there for a moment, looking at the table, the scratched formica, the window, the afternoon light coming in gold and warm, the same gold that hit the table every morning for 20 minutes before sliding away. She sat down, on Opel's side. The first time in her life she'd sat on this side of the table. She placed 3 things on the surface. A $2 bill folded into a triangle, the crease sharp, the point perfect. A photograph, her graduation portrait. Blue cap, blue gown, the first real smile she'd worn in years. A napkin, written in black ink in handwriting that was steady and sure. "Hard days don't last, hard women do. For Miss Opel and Mr. Curtis." She pressed her fingertips against the table, held them there. 1 breath, 2. Then she stood up, walked to the door, pushed it open. The bell rang one more time, and for the first time she looked back. The booth was glowing, afternoon sun pouring through the window, flooding the table with gold. The $2 triangle sat in the light, small and creased and patient. The photograph leaned against the napkin holder. The napkin rested beside it, the ink still wet. Booth number 4, the same booth, the same light, the same $2, waiting, the way it always had.